Do you want to stay more focused on the right goals in your life, or even just figure out what the right goals are for you? Do you want clarity? Do you want better work-life balance? Well, you're in the right place. Welcome to Success Through Failure.
Welcome to the Success Through Failure podcast, the show that reveals failure as your path to success. You'll listen to intriguing interviews with some of the most successful people on the planet and learn how their failures became a launchpad for success and how yours can too. Here's your host, former Division I All-American wrestler, former Division I head coach, speaker, and personal coach, Jim Harshaw.
Welcome to another episode of Success Through Failure. Today I bring you Dr. Ben Williams. Do you feel out of balance in your life, like your family and your work are your priorities, but you don't have enough time in the day, so you're shortchanging them both? Not to mention wanting to work out more or do more of the things that you love. Are you easily distracted and you want to be able to stay more focused so you can lock in on the most important things that you know you should be doing? You want to be more consistent so you can achieve those goals that always seem just out of reach. Or maybe you feel like you just lack the motivation that it takes to get there. Or maybe you're just not clear on what the right first step actually is. Like every time you're about to take action, you doubt whether or not it's the right action or the right goal. I know the feeling. I've got a wife and 4 kids. I have a job, a rental property, this podcast, not to mention the inevitable challenges that just come up with life, like, illness and struggling family members or car trouble. I've got a lot going on. But when I was a Division I All-American athlete, I was completely locked in. I was focused, I was balanced, and I knew exactly what I wanted and the steps that I had to take to get it. But when I got into the real world, things got a lot more complex. There's just a lot more time demands. Like everything seems to be a priority. How are you supposed to figure out what's the right next step for you? Well, I've developed a system that helps you do just that. Find the balance, the clarity, the focus that you're looking for so you can take your life to the next level. So you can start seeing the dreams that are in your mind as realistic goals and have a plan to achieve them. I've opened a few spots on my calendar for free 30-minute strategy calls so you can take that first step toward the life that you've always dreamed about. Just one simple step, one small commitment that will give you huge results, a simple phone call that will leave you with a plan. If you want this life, if you want to truly have a breakthrough, claim one of the few spots open on my calendar, and I'll share with you the formula that has had people who I work with saying things like one of my recent coaching clients, Frank, who said, "My only regret is that I didn't do this 20 years ago." Or like Isaac, who said, "I love this version of myself the best, and I'll do anything to keep it going." I've got dozens more quotes like that. If you want to feel the same way, go to jimharshawjr.com/apply. That's jimharshawjr.com/apply. The principal at Ron Brown College Preparatory High School in Washington, D.C., Ben's life has been anything but easy. At age 4, he and his younger brother, Andre, became wards of the state of Nevada and entered the foster care system. They were sons of a prostitute addicted to drugs. At age 12, they were adopted, and there was hope that their troubles were over, but the reality was far from it. After just a couple of years, because of their father's failing health, they found themselves living with their aunt. Ben's brother, Andre, struggling with behavior problems, found himself at a residential facility for troubled youth. In the ensuing years, Ben found his way successfully through high school and into one of the top public universities in the country, the University of Virginia, Wahoo Wah. But just before Ben's 3rd year in college, Andre was killed by a drunk driver while crossing the road. Despite so many obstacles in his path, Ben received 3 degrees from the University of Virginia, including his doctorate in education and administration. Ben's challenging road has positioned him well to take the lead of the all-boys college preparatory school that he now heads up. And what I want to explore and what I want you, the listener, to learn is how Ben faced adversity only to come out on top. As usual, if you don't have time to listen to the entire episode, or if you hear something you like but you don't have a chance to write it down, make sure you grab your free copy of the action plan. Just go to jimharshawjr.com/action. Again, that's just like a 2-page PDF. It has all the links, all the tactics, all the action items, anything that Dr. Williams shares with us here today. All the good stuff is going to be boiled down into that PDF. So again, jimharshawjr.com/action.
action. Ben, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So I read your article in the UVA on the UVA news website, and you and I both fellow University of Virginia graduates, both graduates of the Curry School of Education at UVA. Actually, we were talking before we hit record here, and we overlapped a year at UVA. Never met, but we did overlap. And just reading the article, I was just blown away, and I want to dive into that story. And there was an article from the Washington Post in January 2016. You were quoted as saying, quote, "My father never met me. My mom was a prostitute and a heroin fiend. I basically became the head of my household at age 3. And I guess at age 4, you went into the foster care system. Do you have any recollection at all of that part of your life, Ben?
Bits and pieces. I think there's times when memories pop out that, you've tried to suppress for the extended period of my life. I kind of, have dreams about them every now and again, or, moments that happen in real life that reminds me of a situation from my past. And so, again, very young, still in my brain is in a major growing stage during that time. And so I think most of what I remember, I can only bring back together by some of the documentation that was provided for me at the time that we became wards of the state.
And you've never met your biological mother or father, is that right?
So I lived with my biological mother for 4 years.
Yeah, you did for 2 years. Yeah,
prior to becoming a ward of the state. But from my knowledge, I never met my biological father. I think that from what I know, was a product of the activities that my mother was participating in at that time. And it's just, again, moments and times. We get bits and pieces of memory, and it's about whether we have, some confirmation from others of if that was something that actually occurred or happened. And so I remember a few people in and out of our lives, nobody that I remember consistently. But, it's many moons ago.
Yeah. And you became wards of the state at such a young age. What was it like growing up in the foster care system?
That was very difficult at that time, and still today. The Nevada social care system is, at the very bottom as far as accountability in states. I think at that time Nevada was number 50 out of 50. Wow. This year, the past couple of years, they've been anywhere between 48 and 50. And I liken it to the Wild Wild West at the time. A lot of people were bringing in young people for the purposes of money, and it was a way to fund your family. And we were put in some real tough situations, and that again impacted me and have made me the person that I am today. But yeah, it's one of those things where you wouldn't wish it on your worst enemy.
Yeah, I can imagine. My wife is a licensed therapist, and she works mostly, almost exclusively with youth. And she actually was an adoption counselor for some years, and she's just come home with these stories that really, I thought only happened in the movies, in the worst kind of movies, with just some of the kids that she works with and has worked with over the years. But you and your brother Andre, so you were adopted at age 12, but your lives kind of went in different directions to some extent. And how do you explain that? I mean, your brother had some challenges, and you went off on your track and ended up at one of the top schools in the country. I mean, how do you explain that sort of dichotomy? I mean, and my wife and I actually were talking about this last night. She worked with kids, brothers and sisters in the same family, but they just kind of go off on separate tracks.
I think there's always a conversation around nature versus nurture. I think there were some factors that we can attribute to my success versus my brother's inability to navigate the educational space. I think the different drug uses by my mother during the time of our conceptions and throughout the pregnancies might have been able to contribute to my brother's emotional disabilities, psychological disabilities, as well as academic disabilities. And on my end, the drug did not have as much of an impact. Also, again, the age range. So me being put in foster, the age that I was in, the age that I was when I was put into foster care versus the age that my brother was at that time. So me going in as a late 4-year-old, early 5-year-old, able to kind of show that I struggled with our past and was able to receive some type of emotional support. Well, that might not have presented itself from my brother's end because he was such a young child. And so he would not have received the similar support that I did as we transitioned into the foster care system. But also I think, I felt a responsibility to raising my brother. So it was not only a brotherly relationship, it was a father-child relationship. And, for me, it was about protection. And so I always knew that as an older brother, it was my responsibility to make sure that we found a space away from where we currently resided. And I knew that I had to figure out how to make sure that we were okay in the long run. And so I think that responsibility really helped push me to do well in school, to do well, try to do well in everything that I did, because I wanted us to be self-sufficient and not have to rely on others.
Yeah, and I know that when you were heading into college, you referred to graduation and getting a degree as something that, quote, we were going to do, that we were going to graduate from college, and that was you and Andre, right?
Yeah. Again, we were a unit. We were connected at the hip. He's all I've ever known, at that point, all I ever knew, as far as my biological family. And so, his struggles impacted me greatly, and but they also provided an external motivation to do better. And so, every bit of success that I experienced or things I was able to overcome, I attributed to my brother. He had a major impact on my life, and for many years of my life, I was living more for him than I was living for myself. And so a lot of when I say we, it's because of him and his, I guess his attachment to me and the way that he looked up to me.
And then the unthinkable happened, and then and you lost him. You were going into your third year at UVA, going to be into your junior year at UVA, and you lost him. And in the article that I read, you mentioned that almost derailed you. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, anybody that's ever lost a sibling before knows how difficult it actually can be. But I again, compared to losing a child, I really had raised my brother for the majority of my life. And, he looked up to me differently than he looked towards anybody else. And so I always said, I was the protector. I was the lead. I was the older brother. And I was the lead of our family. And our family was just really us. And so I took it personally. I failed, and up to that point, I'd never experienced failure to that degree. There's no coming back from that. And I took sole responsibility for his passing. I questioned, my existence. I questioned why a soul such as his would be taken over mine. And it challenged my faith. It challenged my being as a person. And it challenged my resolve. I didn't think that there was much more for me to do. I lost, at that point, I thought that I had lost everything that I had lived for. And that's tough to deal with as a 20-year-old who one has internalized and suppressed so many feelings and emotions over the course of my life, who probably at that point had not dealt with, the trauma that I escaped, or, I, again, was taught to suppress it at a time when I should have been expressing it much more. And I think that moment in time kind of revealed all of the emotional struggles, the psychological struggles that I'd had my entire life that it had ignored because there was an end goal. And so all of that came to a head at that moment where I just questioned life itself and whether existence was something that I should be concerned about.
How did you find the strength and the courage to move forward after that, Ben?
Honestly, I don't know. If I could explain it, I feel like I'd be a millionaire right now. Just trauma, it impacts people in so many different ways. There's a moment that I can explain. I don't know how people will receive it, how many people will believe it. But me being a spiritual person and believing that there's having faith in something, a higher power than us, I question my faith. I questioned the existence of that higher power for a month because I was blaming myself. And I was like, well, all of this, everything that you put me through, then you take the one thing that I've lived for. And it was that moment. Well, it was a moment literally a month after my brother had passed. I was very destructive. I'd gone out and had a very destructive evening. And, people could say, well, it was your abuse of alcohol at the time, or, you were in an emotional state. I blamed myself for not being able to say goodbye, And there was a moment, I'd been praying the whole time. I was, trying to negotiate with God, like, if you take him, he can take my place. I'd much prefer for him to be in heaven than for me. All of those things, the range of emotions that are going through, and just really it always came back to the root problem was that I just wished I had a chance to say goodbye. And again, a spiritual moment, where I felt like I know that I did. Others will say it was a feeling, or, there's some other issue that was going on at that time, but I saw my brother ascend, and, it was a moment for him to tell me, he said, hey, I love you. This is not your fault. You have somebody else that's looking down to help you. And he basically told me goodbye and said, go get help. And that was a change moment for me. And I think it took a long time for me to come to grips with the idea of him not being there. But that moment kind of took me out of my destructive mindset and gave me clarity enough to go seek somebody to speak to get myself back on track. And so, again, one of those moments that some people may believe, others may not.
Can you share that moment? Can you tell us specifically about that moment? I know I read about it in the article. I think it's fascinating. Can you feel comfortable sharing that?
Oh, sure. Again, a destructive evening. I think I was at a space where I just didn't care at all about myself or anybody else. Went out, got completely intoxicated, came back, dating a woman at the time, and she, I'm crying profusely, and I had this moment. I'm screaming, I miss my brother, and I see my brother in this moment. And again, he tells me those things like, you're not at fault. Goodbye. This is goodbye. You have somebody else looking down on you. And It was that moment I stopped crying. I told her I'm going to find some help tomorrow. And it's just one of those moments that I think I needed. Yeah. And again, that next morning, made a couple phone calls and found somebody to walk me through, a professional to walk me through the grieving process. And I think that was the moment where I realized that everything that I had gone through, my experience, there was a bigger ask of me for being able to get through those. And it was then that I realized that my calling was much more than just me and my brother. It was, now I'm starting to develop what my career path may look like, what my, the talent that's been provided to me. And, I'm a man of faith, I'm a Christian. So we talk about offerings, but you have to offer your talent and your time. And I think that's when I realized that my talent was, my past and my experiences, my ability to relate to young people. And it was my responsibility to start giving back to those, because just because my brother was gone, that didn't mean that I had to stop caring for others.
I'm a man of faith as well, and a Christian as well, and I really believe that every adversity has a reason, and there can be a positive outcome if you believe that, if you choose that. And
it takes a long time to get to that path, though.
Sure.
I can tell you that.
Yeah, and I've not experienced near the adversity that you have, and I think most of the listeners can probably say the same thing. And I appreciate you sharing the depth of that darkness and the depth of your pain, Ben, because I think it's that people need to hear. When people hear this and learn of your story, they can look at their own lives and say, okay, I've had pain, I've had darkness in my life, and maybe it's a similar form as yours, or maybe it's completely different. And maybe the listener is saying, yes, I've had this, I felt this, maybe it's now, maybe it's in the past. But if you can look at that and say, okay, what is the bigger ask here? Like you said, what is the calling here? What is what value can come out of that? And I think part of that right now is this conversation that we're having. There are a lot of people listening who are absorbing this story and learning that there may be more for them because of not despite their challenges and adversity, but because of them. And Ben, when you go back to school into your junior year at UVA, and eventually you graduate. A couple years later, you get your degree. And when talking about your graduation, you said, quote, "I'd done something that I didn't believe was an option for a person like me." What do you mean by that? Can you unpack that a little bit?
Just, where you start and where you finish. Statistically speaking, there's no way that I was supposed to graduate college. The foundation of the academic foundation did not exist for me. I didn't come from a background where reading was reinforced, that academic success was available or modeled or present. Bouncing around from home to home and school to school. I didn't think that college. I thought the only way for me to get to college was through entertainment, being an athlete or being a musician, whatever it might have been. Just didn't think that I compared to college graduates because up until my junior year or sophomore year in high school, I really had not known other peers that went on to college and went on to be successful in college. And so that was weird for me once I got there, because I quickly realized that I'm not the same as everybody else. And that struggle was present. There's socioeconomic differences, there's racial differences, there's experience differences, and I felt isolated. I felt so far removed from the majority of individuals at UVA. I felt out of place, and it's because I'd never had to navigate that world before. Or I'd never been exposed to that world up until, my 10th or 11th grade years in high school. And so it was foreign. It was scary. It was, there were many moments where I just said, this is too hard. This is too difficult, working 4 or 5 jobs just to make ends meet, and then trying to go to school. And so, again, for somebody with all of those factors that existed at that time, and the experience that I went through prior, I just didn't think that college was the right fit, the right thing for me. Little did I know, I was a perfect candidate for it in my when I reflect, because it was the launching pad for something greater. And I think the perseverance and grit that I showed during those 4 years have had a major impact of who I am as an adult today. And my family were, my adopted family were as supportive as they knew to be. But again, I'd been such a reserved person my entire life, and an individual who tried to do everything on his own, talking and being transparent about my struggles was extremely difficult. So they didn't even know how I was feeling at that time. But it's just, those are moments that you're either going to grow from or you're going to let defeat you. And fortunately, I was able to grow from them. And, it just, I just look at everything, just the entire upbringing, statistics, the me being a young man who has never had a foundation in education until later on in his life. I didn't think that I'd be anywhere near the caliber of student who'd be able to graduate.
And I'm of the mindset that you have to believe something in order to see it. The saying is, I'll believe it when I see it, but I think it's the other way around. I'll see it when I believe it. When did you make a paradigm shift, or did you make this paradigm shift that it was actually possible for you to graduate from college? Because if you have this sort of paradigm that this isn't for me, but you did it.
Yeah. It was just, failure has never been something that set well with me. And I had an external motivator, which was my brother for the first 2 years. And then in a weird way, he was the external motivator for the last 2 years as well. And I think once I survived first year, I walked away saying, I can do it. I can compete against the best of them. I just have to put in a different type of effort than others. And I think that's where it shifted for me. I just didn't know how long it was going to take me. But, the UVA culture is that, we play hard, we study hard, and we graduate in 4 years. And I just refused to be that student who needed an extra summer or an extra semester to finish. And I just did. I took advantage of every resource I could once I learned how to navigate that space, how to advocate for myself. By my fourth year, I had really learned the system of being a student at the university, and I maximized the opportunity and just took advantage of it as best I could.
Are you able to use your story and your background to inspire or help your students at the school to make their own paradigm shift?
Absolutely. Not teaching them, but presenting to them that they have the power to write their own narrative, regardless of upbringing, regardless of situations. You can change the narrative to be written the way that you want it to be written, and you just have to be willing to put in the effort and the work. And you have to believe in yourself. And if you're not believing in yourself, you have people here who are. And, I'll give them a little bit of backstory, use experiences to help them see the possibilities. It's a frequent conversation, and I present it fairly regularly in many different forms to several of the students. I give it pieces that I think that they need at the time.
Mm-hmm. And you've mentioned several times now getting help, taking advantage of all the resources available to you. Is that important? Because I think a lot of people see that as either a weakness or just something that they don't want to do. Whether they were a person in your situation, having the background that you've had growing up, or just kind of out in the real world right now that maybe they've had their own challenges in their own past, or just want to achieve a different level of success or a better life or a healthier relationship or a healthier body. I mean, are you of the mind that people should take advantage and leverage resources they have?
Absolutely. And I think, mental health is something that's mental health support is often shunned in society.
Right.
And but it's an available resource, and people who study the brain, emotions, et cetera, for many years, just as, we as educators train and doctors train and engineers train, there's professionals out there who train to help people understand their emotions and their brains at their individual space and times. We have to, if you're seeking a better self, what better place to start? And so, although I probably don't do it as frequently as I should, I do believe in it. And if a resource is available, you have to learn to advocate for yourself, regardless of perceptions. And so, or stereotypes, whatever may exist. You have to be willing to go out on a limb. And so I struggled with that for many years. I mean, even after I got the initial help, I thought I was okay, and there would still be moments where I would freak out because of a memory or because of an anniversary or whatever it might be. And I realized I still needed help, that everything had not been resolved. And that was 10 years later where I decided that, I want to be better than my current self, and this is where I need to start.
Ben, you've had just an incredible life story that is, I mean, it's heartbreaking in so many ways. And you go to UVA, you get your first degree, then you get a master's degree, then you get a doctorate, and you've got 3 degrees from an amazing university, a great education school, and you could probably go and be a principal at a lot of places. Why Ron Brown? Why take on the challenge of an all-male school in Washington, D.C. to serve at-risk youth when that's going to be that's going to be hard. It's going to be a lot harder than being a principal at a lot of other places, right? I mean, why take on that challenge?
It's the work that I was called to do, in my opinion. I'm following the path that's been laid before me. And again, in order to give my offering, which is my experience, I can't run away from opportunities that people may deem as impossible or difficult or extremely stressful. All of this work is stressful in some way, shape, form. But this is a population of students who do not have individuals who are willing to take a chance on them, for the most part, generally speaking. And so when you have this type of vulnerable population and people who tend to shy away or run away from them, it then proves to them that the stereotypes are real, or that their self-worth isn't. They should not think of themselves highly because others don't as well. And so I know the power of positive influences. I know the power of people who believe in you. And I want to be able to give that to one child. And so to have the opportunity to do it to a whole school, to help young people better themselves, and to, regardless of wherever the space is. I went to junior high school in D.C. My dad has lived here since '94, and this has kind of been a second home for me. So this is a city that I know, and this is a resource that I believed in, and so I just wanted to do my part, how little it may be. If I can have an impact, then that's what I want to be able to do.
If you could go back and talk to your 20-year-old self, who would be just a couple of years older than the students that you're leading right now, if you could go back to talk to your 20-year-old self who had just lost his brother, what kind of advice would you give to yourself? What would you say?
Just stay the course. Just believe in yourself and stay faithful. And, those are the things that have helped you get through more trying times in that moment. And it's going to help you going forward too. And so soak it all in, accept it, and utilize it when the times when you need it most.
What habits or routines or even ways of thinking do you have that you feel have set you apart and helped you achieve all this success that you've achieved, despite all the reasons and excuses you could have used to not do anything that you've done now? Any habits or anything that you've done in particular? Maybe it's on a regular basis, or maybe periodically you've done this and it's helped you. Anything, any sort of habits or routines?
I try to work out 4 to 5 times a week. I find that to be a space that I can decompress, and it's very much of a stress relief. And so, that's working out for me and playing basketball. For others, it might be something different. But to take an hour to 2 hours to do that per day, I think keeps a healthy spirit and a clear mind, and relieves some of the pressure that may, exist in your workspace or your academic space, family space, whatever it may be. I also try to, and again, my faith, I always try to spend a couple of weeks, a couple of Sundays at church per month. I I'm not going to sit here and say I go every Sunday, but as much as I can attend, I definitely try to attend. And part of that is just for me, and I'm not an outgoing person, for the most part, until you really get to know me. So trying to take time every day, to be by yourself. And for me, that helps a lot, and just to kind of think about where you are, the struggles, kind of have a mindful minute and, just kind of get yourself into a better space before you move and start interacting with others. So you're not taking out whatever frustrations on an undeserving person, So those are the things that I try to do every day in my routine. I'm a very routine-oriented person, and so when those things don't exist, I can be a little bit flustered. But I try to make a habit of at least doing those at least once a day.
Yeah, and I like the concept of the mindful minute. For anybody who's listened to this podcast for any length of time, they know that I ask that question just about to just about every guest. But tell me, the question of tell me about a habit or a routine that you do that has set you apart, and it's always some form of pause. Sometimes it's journaling or meditation or prayer, or otherwise there's something along this concept of the mindful minute that, and I define it as a short period of focused reflection around specific questions that leads to clarity of action and peace of mind, and that's what we're all seeking through this. Through our chaotic days and weeks and lives is that clarity of action and that peace of mind. So I appreciate you sharing that, Ben. And can you tell us about a time where you failed? And I know you talked about that time, with your brother, and you feel like that's a failure. I think from the outside looking in, for myself, and I certainly would include the listeners in this, I don't. I certainly see that as a challenge. I don't see that as a failure from the outside looking in, and I know you have your own sort of views on that. Can you tell us about a time, maybe in your professional life, where you failed? When we look at someone like you, who's you've got your doctorate, and you're the leader of an amazing school that's been in a lot of media outlets and covered since its opening, I think just a year or so ago. But a time where you've been climbing and climbing and climbing, and you've got this confidence behind you, but you've tripped up, and maybe you had to kind of reset and pull yourself out of that again.
I think that exists, especially in this field. It happens a lot, where I'm having to adjust or because of a failure moment. I'm just trying to figure out which one I want to share. So there was a moment when I was a high school assistant principal where I built this relationship with this young man who had a similar struggle as mine. Our upbringings were very similar, and he had struggled in school. He had struggled in the academic space, and I'd worked with him. I'd worked with him for an entire year, and we were getting him on pace to graduate, and he was excited. But there was a moment that he made a really, really poor decision that caused him to get institutionalized. And I think that's, I took that in, again, as my responsibility. And it was a moment of failure for me, because I felt like we had really done so much work to push this young man to the next level. That just hurt. That was a painful moment. So that's one when I had a student. Another time is this, this work is mostly about adults when you get into the position of leadership, and shifting the mindset of adults has been extremely difficult. And so, these past couple of years, as I moved into more of a leadership role, there's been moments where I've lost staff members, and I felt like I took a lot of the responsibility because I didn't do a good job coaching them, getting them to the space where they can perform at a high level in the academic space. And so those have been moments that really, don't sit well with me when you lose a staff member who you think that we had much more potential, much more capability, and I didn't do a great job of coaching them to be able to perform at a high level.
And I'll ask you one last question. My listeners love to get a resource out of these episodes. How about a book? Is there a book that you feel has really impacted your life, or a book or other resource? Maybe it's a book, maybe it's a podcast or some kind of internet resource otherwise that you could recommend or that you could share?
That's a good question. One book that I really, really enjoy is Good to Great by Jim Collins.
Yeah.
That has, not just in the workspace, but in the life space, getting people around you who are there to support you, but not just to make you feel great about everything that you do, but who also feel comfortable enough to give you constructive feedback, to push your thinking on many of your decisions, to give you feedback that you may not want to hear at the time. And I think that's in the workspace as well as life space. I mean, there's that book is applicable for all aspects of my life, and I go back to that probably once a year just to kind of remind myself about getting the right people on the bus, and people who are aligned to your outlook and your mission in life. And so that's a book that I definitely recommend to others. Also, another book by Tatum, Difficult Conversations. Just the work that I do, but it's amazing how that book, you can use that in life as well.
Called Difficult Conversations?
Yes, Difficult Conversations. And so that helps when you're having when you have to have difficult conversations with your partners or your children or your parents or whatever it might be. Those are those are books that are geared towards leadership. But again, you can take them and use them in any and all aspects of your life.
Ben, great resources, great story, great interview. Thank you so much for making time to come on the show. I know you've got a million things going on, being the head of your school, or head of Ron Brown College Prep, but I appreciate you making time, and I know the listeners appreciate it as well.
No, thank you.
And for the listener, again, you can grab a copy of the action plan. Just go to jimharshawjr.com/action. Again, jimharshawjr.com/action. And I will have a link to, actually, Ben is on Twitter, and you can follow him at Principal RBHS. So that stands for Ron Brown High School. So give him a follow, give him a shout out, and let him know you're supporting him and everything that he's doing. So I'll have a link to that in the action plan. And for the listener, until next time, take the time to get clear on your goals and embrace failure as a stepping stone on your path to success.
Don't forget what I talked about before the interview. If you want to find balance, clarity, and focus, take the next step and go to jimharshawjr.com/apply. Space on my calendar is very limited, so claim your spot now. jimharshawjr.com/apply.